I'd like to introduce you to Elena, which gives me a great honor. Elena joined Concur back in '98, and it's a fantastic story. She came to an acquisition of a company that was acquired by Concur back in the day, and she stayed with Concur for over 17 years. And very, very impressive biography. She actually, in addition to heading worldwide sales and marketing, she was head of product management, and she was the executive vice president responsible for the small and medium businesses at Concur. And of course, now she's the president of Concur. She also helped the company lead the company through a transition from an on-prem company to becoming really one of the most, I guess, successful cloud-based solution providers in the world. And now a company that has been acquired by SAP for a very nice chunk of change. So really very well done. As venture capitalists, we can say that. And Elena is also, and I love that about your biography as well, she's very well known for her leadership on topics such as inclusion and diversity, and I also saw that you're a very fast reader, so. And outside of Concur, Elena is a member of the board of directors of PayScale as well, so obviously you have very strong affinity to innovation and startups, so I think it's going to be a fantastic dialogue. And so now, without further ado, Elena, the stage is yours. Thank you.
That point about reading, I think I was the only one that laughed at that because at some point over the last year, someone asked me what my hidden superpower was, and I really had no idea what to say, and so I confided that I'm a fast reader, which is true and comes in handy now and again, but probably not that interesting for today. So we'll get to the real meat of the conversation. Today, I will attempt to answer some of the questions that you all asked about client experience and client success, but I'll do it through telling you details of Concur over the last 17 years. I'll talk a little bit about the pivots and transitions that we've been through, and a little bit about some of the humility we gained along the way, some of the lessons we learned along the way, and how I think keeping the customer in the front seat riding shotgun the whole time has really been a core part of our success and something that we're still learning about to this day. So thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to start with a little bit of our background. As many of you know, I think Concur's the leader in business travel and expense management. It used to be years ago when we started this business that there was a question mark as to whether that was a big enough space. So for any of you that are thinking about that in your own lives right now, if T&E is a big enough space, if expense reporting and travel booking is a big enough space to be doing almost $1 billion run rate in revenue and to be acquired for the multiple we were just acquired for, there's a lot of space out there. There's a lot of areas to disrupt and innovate around, and we've made a decent business of that. Our mission over the years has been to take the complexity out of that process. We start with a really, really gnarly problem that people hate. I was telling a story last week at an event, something that really sat with me in this really cool way. I was on a plane going, I can't remember where. I've been all over the world the last couple months. But I was on a plane sitting next to a gentleman who turned out to be a customer. This doesn't happen all that irregularly now with 30 million end users of our solution. And he works for a large entertainment media company, and he manages the talent. He runs an organization where his job is to manage the revenue producer of that company. So he's pretty important. And he was sitting next to me, and we were comparing notes about what we did. And I said, I work for Concur. And he goes, oh, which is not the reaction you want from a client sitting next to you on an airplane. And so I said, oh, are you a user? And he said, yeah, I'm a user. I said, well, I feel you have feedback. And he said, actually, I don't have feedback. I love what you do. My assistant loves Concur. It's really easy. It's great. I don't ever want to do another expense report in my whole life. So the more you can remove steps out of that, the better I'm going to feel about this whole process. And that's the problem that we solve. It's so visceral. It's so ugly for people that even those that are automated, how many of you still hate entering attendees when you have to do a meal expense? Like, that's not fixed yet, and we're working to fix that. So there's always something, there's always another rock to turn over and something that we're doing to innovate to make that a little bit better. Today, we serve more than 30,000 companies across 100 countries. Some of you may be on sort of your first steps about going global. There's a whole lot of lessons we can share there at another time if you're interested in. I joined Concur by a small acquisition, as we just talked about. Later that year, we went public. I thought I was going to move to Seattle for a couple minutes. I'm from here. And I figured I would come back down home here and, run out another couple startups. And it turns out I fell in love with the place. We went public in December of that year. We flew high for a couple of quarters. And then we found ourselves by 2001 with a stock price at 31 cents. And so going through that experience and understanding how to pick up from that and how to think about, okay, what responsibility do we have to the people that remain here? What responsibility do we have to those early clients that bet on us was a massively humbling experience, massively humbling. And so what did we do? Well, we looked inwards, and we sure as heck didn't look at the stock price, because that was a lousy indicator of what we thought the potential was. We stopped listening to what the competition was saying about us, and we listened very intently to our clients. And we did something that at the time a lot of people thought was really stupid. We hunkered down in a conference room, those of us that were left, and we started talking about values. We started talking about what we were in it for. What was the kind of place that we wanted to build? And we sat around a table and looked at, are we about, work-life balance? And at the time, quite frankly, we weren't. There was no balance happening. We were just trying to survive. But the number one thing that kept surfacing to the top of that list was we love our customers. And I kind of got voted out of being able to use the word love in those values. I mean, I think I feel more comfortable doing it today, but back then we used passion. And so that number one value was passion for and responsibility to the customer, and I think it's really sort of put a wrapper around all the decisions that we've made since. And we're still growing from there. We sort of clawed our way out of that time. We made it through the next recession much better, because I think we've learned a lot about focus and about client experience and about really rallying together through those hard times. I think the other thing we had going for us is that we created a product that clients needed in good times and in bad. And that will help weather those stormy times as well. And right now, we're still growing like crazy. I think we're in a little bit of a unique position. We're still growing 40% year over year and on bookings. And that's something to be pretty excited about. We think we're very bullish about the future of this business, not just because of the strength of what we get to do inside the SAP platform and on that stage and with those kinds of clients, but also the growth of our small and mid-market business has been significant. It went from 0 to north of 50% of our commercial revenue across the last 5 years. So it's some of those pivots where we looked at what does the client expect from us, and we realized, well, there's more clients that expect something from us and we're giving them nothing. And so consistently looking through those eyes, it was an important part of sort of how we got here. So for employees, business travel is sometimes fun, but the administration of it is not so great. This whole process can be really awful for travelers and really awful for the back office. And so the idea was spurred for this company by Steve Singh, actually. So Steve was our CEO for many years and now runs the business network group inside SAP. He was working in technology here in the Valley and had amassed thousands and thousands of dollars worth of expense reports and just couldn't be bothered to get into the spreadsheet to write them down. And so as he was thinking about his next steps, he and our two other founders got together and decided what they would do is create a solution that automated that problem. And it started out as shrink wrap software, actually. It started out as a set of software that sits on it was in Egg. Who remembers Egghead software? Anybody remember Egghead? A couple of us that are in my generation. We sold it in a box on a couple shelves in a store, of all things. And the idea at that time was that we would solve this problem and people, the end user, would make the decision. It's funny because now I feel like we've kind of come full circle and the end user is in the driver's seat once again. But we quickly transitioned from the packaged software days into the web and finally SaaS, and I'll talk a little bit about that journey in a minute. But some of the big transformational steps in our development were around doing things like moving from the packaged software world into the web world, which again doesn't apply to anybody here, but I think it's interesting when you think about the rationale for some of those moves. So as we go through the value proposition, it was really about, first of all, we did something good for the end user in the very beginning, but then we moved into doing something really good for the back office, for the decision maker, for the travel manager, for the CFO, for the controller, etc. Because at the end of the day, every second that your employee spends not doing what they're paid to do, being a scientist, being an engineer, being a lawyer, being a salesperson, is a second that they're not spending on the core business, and that's really where the value sits. So we look at the day-to-day tasks that get in the way of productivity. Those are the things that we try to pull out. That message resonates with everyone. But from there, we get more nuanced by size. So how many of you are selling in the consumer space? Anyone? How about small and mid-market? Predominantly focused on small and mid-market? Yeah. And then how about predominantly focused on the enterprise market, so large businesses. So a little bit mix of both. The interesting thing about our solution is that there's something in it for everyone. But the message gets a little bit more nuanced as you get into that level of granularity. So for large business, it's about control, it's about compliance, it's about visibility into spend, it's about cost savings. For a small and mid-market client, it's about efficiency, removing tasks out of people's hands. And in a lot of our small and mid-market clients, they'll tell us it's about avoiding hiring an individual in the accounting organization that's not going to have a very fun job and then not going to have a really great career path. So the more we can avoid hiring roles like that, the better off we are. And that's why people buy our software in the small and mid-market. Healthcare and life sciences companies want compliance to the Sunshine Act. And it's more and more as well, the message is about employee retention, employee satisfaction, employee engagement. We do a study every now and again on win-loss. We actually do it more than now and again. We do it pretty often. And we look at what's the reason for people buying Concur. And we look at when we lost, why did we lose as well. One of the things that's changed over the last couple of years, I was mentioning earlier today, is that employee engagement and satisfaction, employee efficiency used to be in the sort of the bottom quartile of reasons to utilize our solution. It was all about cost savings, control, compliance, visibility. Now it's hovering around number 2 in terms of the reasons to utilize our solution. I just got back from a visit with a large client in the UK, and the whole steering team meeting that I sat in with them was about how does this apply to our end user satisfaction and productivity goals, which was super cool to see. And something that has really changed in our world, how we think about servicing the customer, how we think about making sure that we're looking not just at, did you get what you wanted, travel manager? Did you get what you wanted, controller? It's also a lot about, are your employees as effective as they can be? And when I sit next to a guy on the plane, he feels good about what he's doing and that it's not taking away from his real job. So I talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the pivot points in more detail so that we can draw out some of those client success stories and client success metrics, and maybe where we went awry a couple of times through the course of the journey. In the beginning, I mentioned we shipped our software in boxes, but that really quickly moved to a client server technology, where we're then selling to our first big clients like Sprint, and Pfizer were some of our first big sort of intranet-based clients that we sold. Clients like Dell were some of the early ones that really helped us along our way. From there, I would like to say that we were these really amazing gurus that saw the SaaS train coming, but that's not really what happened. What happened was we had a bunch of clients telling us a couple of really important things. We had them telling us that they didn't like our pricing model. They were telling us that they didn't want to make a huge capital expenditure up front, and that they'd rather have us. They were being asked questions at that time. This was 2001. Like, can I just lease this? And so our first step was we went out and looked at organizations that could provide financing. But then we also quickly realized that there was some power in scale for us, and that if we did this right, and if we pulled all of these organizations together, we could probably, if we did it well, service them less expensively than they could service themselves. And so those two things led us to say, well,
we've got one shot at this, and we've got to pick a lane. And this was survival time. Remember, our stock's at 31 cents. The cool thing about 31 cents is no one's watching you. The bad thing about 31 cents is you have one shot. And we had to make sure we got it right. And so we went through this crazy transition from licensed, sort of enterprise, on-premise, deployed intranet software with a big upfront price tag to a SaaS model where we decided that we would sell this solution on a pay-as-you-go basis with some setup fees up front to implement, and then do the best we could to earn that client's business every single day. And I have to say, we got kind of lucky. Organizations back at that time that said, we'll never move this off of our core infrastructure. You can't possibly deal with our security requirements. You can't deal with our interfaces and data connectivity requirements back and forth. There's no way. They all moved. Within a 5-year period, we had the vast majority of our clients moved into the cloud. And it just all went forward from there. Next major pivot was we had some competitors ankle biting us. From the bottom of the market, and we started to see organizations asking us about travel. Expense happens after travel. You can have an expense report without travel, but you can't have travel without an expense report. So how are you going to bring those two things together? And there was a small competitor out there that started to get some traction, and so we bought them. And we've done that a couple times in the landscape. And so I think having the humility to look inside and say, oh, you know, we missed something. And so, you know, hopefully we have the wherewithal to go fix it, or to either build it or buy it or partner. But to always admit that we might have missed something. And in that case, I'd say we did. I'd say we sort of missed that travel thing coming. And we were very lucky to have a really cool acquisition happen in our history, a company called Outtask. And they really came in and injected some really phenomenal talent into the business and some really phenomenal thinking into the business. It's when we started to, we went from shipping software every 6 to 9 months to shipping software monthly. We went from a much more sort of waterfall approach to the beginnings of our agile transformation. And so it wasn't just about bringing in technology, we also brought in some amazing talent that helped us really see our business, really see our client and our industry a little bit differently. So the next step was, again, turning to the customer. I remember this really vividly in around 2005, 2006. Again, we're all sitting around the table. We're growing pretty well. Things are going pretty well. We're growing 20% or so year over year. We're profitable now. And we looked at it and said, okay, where do we go now? And again, there's this temptation to look at T&E and say, well, we should build more products. Like, we have all these cool enterprise customers. We should go sell them more stuff. But we knew from our history that we had to be really careful with that we had to make sure that that buyer was aligned with everything else we did. So instead we looked at, okay, how much of the world is still using spreadsheets for expense reports? And it turns out it was a lot. So if you operated in a sector that we weren't in, like the federal government, if you operated in an organization that was based outside the US, if you operated in an organization that had less than 500 employees, you sure as heck weren't using Concur, and you were probably using spreadsheets or worse, paper. And so we made the decision at that time to look at the segments where we weren't and to really get paranoid about who might come up again competitively from the bottom and approach us at a flank that we weren't prepared for. And so we made investments in all 3 of those areas. We made investments in the small and mid-market, which is a business that I took on 5 years ago. We made investments in the US federal government, which is now our largest single client. And we made investments outside the United States, which now accounts for 23% of our bookings. So, which by the way is not a stat that I would share super broadly. That's a bookings number. It's nothing you can do a lot of math from. Just saying it's a good trajectory. So from that perspective, we ended up doing some really interesting things in small and mid-market, and this was another key transformation where we had to look inside and look at the client really deeply. When organizations asked us to utilize our software and they were a little bit on the small side, We would do an okay job, not great, it wasn't growing. And so when we decided to make that investment, we got all the data that we could together in a room, and we looked at it, and a couple of our product managers were like, okay, this is the profile of the client that buys from us in the mid-market, so we've got to go do more of that. We got to go get more of those guys. And that's a phenomenally great textbook answer, but it's the wrong answer. The right answer is, who's not buying from us and why? What are we getting wrong? To where like no one in the size, 10 employees to 400 employees are buying. Why is no one there buying from us? Well, it turns out it was a couple reasons. The product wasn't right, the pricing wasn't right, the sales comp model wasn't right, the field engagement model wasn't right, the marketing model wasn't right, nothing was right. And so we had to blow that stuff up and think from the ground up about what that client wanted. And I have to tell you, those were some of the hardest times, the hardest conversations inside Concur were right there, where you're significantly pulling apart what we thought was true about our client base and about our product line and challenging every single point. And we've gotten through it pretty well, but I would say there's another turn of the crank coming directly in this area in SMB, and making sure that more and more is done digitally. There's more client acquisition happening without any touch, and that implementation and service models actually match that. Our small and mid-market customers will tell us, I don't need to talk to you. The only reason I need to talk to you is because I don't understand something in your product. And so we kind of have this mentality that every call is a failure in the product or in the documentation. And so eliminating all of those calls starts with, what is that individual's experience online? And really continuing to work to pare that down. So we're in the next stage of evolution, and we realize in that next stage of evolution, sorry, you guys, I'm just not getting through all of these slides. I'm sorry about that. I just got to the internet disruption and SaaS and small biz. Mobile came into play around that same time, and so now mobile is, the vast majority of our transactions are beginning to come through on mobile devices. It's the fastest growing, obviously, part of our user population is using mobile, and so more and more we're creating features mobile first, which has been sort of a great way to actually streamline our development processes as well. I look forward to a day where we're not investing as much on the web client, and we get to put a lot more development effort against the mobile. So then the platform is sort of the next major turn for the company. We realize as well that the best software in the world, while we might think part of it is created at Concur, there's a whole lot of it that's not created at Concur. There are a lot of organizations out there, some of them in this room, that are doing some really interesting things that apply to our buyer, that apply to our end traveler, and that apply to just our industry in general. And so the Concur Platform Initiative is around bringing all those things together. There are things that you can sort of easily think through in your own daily lives, connectivity to Uber, connectivity to Starbucks. If you're a Concur user and you get out of an Uber car, instead of just confirming and looking at your payment information, you can click a Concur button and it'll send that charge directly into your expense report. Same things on the Starbucks app. So really cool things that just take steps away from the end user. And then really cool things like in the VAT reclaim space, in the compliance space, in the Sunshine Act, sort of healthcare and life sciences compliance space, that are good for the company as well. And so that's a big area where we're able to sort of harness the energy of a lot of young, innovative companies, and also a lot of sort of established companies to add value to the client. So with that, I want to transition really quickly into how we look at client success. Here's a couple stats about a day in the life at Concur that you can just have a quick gander at, just to give you a sense of the scale of the business today. 30 million end users and a whole lot of transactions cooking through there. So when we think about the client success journey, this has been a journey from the beginning for us, of listening to the customer from the very beginning and tailoring our strategy toward that. But also challenging the customer when we think that we're thinking about things that they're not thinking about. Challenging our industry when they're not ready to hear some of the things that we're saying. And continuing to have courage, but humility at the same time as we navigate that. Our vision for customer success is grounded in three important things: anticipating their needs, identifying what we can do to meet them, and then executing. So from the time the customer learns who we are, So we dial it all the way back behind sales and implementation. From the time they learn about who we are focused on an effortless experience, and we use that word effortless a lot because we know we're not there. It's an aspirational goal to be effortless in every step. Is something that we speak a lot about internally, and that we try to hold ourselves to internally. And this means that we make sure that the metrics meet what the client's asking for. I appreciated the discussion about metrics earlier. A really quick story. Our implementation teams used to be measured on a couple of really important metrics: time to deploy, time to first transaction, time to close a case. And you know what happened? Like, we thought that all of those things were leading to a great outcome. We thought, like, the faster you get there, obviously, the happier they're going to be, because then they're using the service, they're getting all this value, and they're going to love it. Well, I can see some nodding heads in the audience. That's kind of like, my oldest son is dyslexic, and I was asking him this question. I just one of these like personality questions a while ago, and it was something we were talking about at work, or that we read in a book or something. And it was, would you rather go the long way fast or the short way slow? Every sort of type A business person in the room will say, like, long way fast, I gotta be going, I gotta be cooking, I gotta be rolling, I gotta be going. And I said this to my son, I was like, oh yeah, long way fast, long way fast, long way fast. And he goes, why would you do that? You'd just be tired when you get there. Short way slow, I got all kinds of energy when I show up. And so it's just a funny thing about how the brain works and how our clients saw us. Like, don't make me go fast. I need to learn. I need to know. I need to be rested up when I get there so that I can go be productive for my people. And so we switched that metric over the last couple of years, and now we have specific teams associated with the implementation process, then a specific team after that focused on getting them from sort of 0 to their first 1,000 transactions or their first 500 transactions, depending on their size. And we hold their hands every step of the way until they feel like they got what they needed. And it sounds like such an obvious thing, but when you're measuring what you think is right, it may not always be. And we found, as we asked and asked and asked, that we got to the right answer eventually. We do have a client success team that works for me. And so we're like 60% of you, I think. And that team engages in the company in a couple of different ways. And I think we talked a little bit about engaging with sales, engaging with services. I think the most important relationship in our company that they have is with product. And so we try to create a massively closed loop cycle from every credit that comes in, every disconnect that comes in, every client escalation call that comes in, gets back to what feature did it relate to, or if it's just a service issue, like I gotta reset my password. That's still an issue. If they have to call us because they can't figure out how to reset their password, why don't they know how to reset their password? That should be so obvious. And so we try to create a completely closed loop so that at every step of the way, there's accountability, but there's also a feedback loop. 2 years ago, our developers didn't know how many disconnects were happening in their core feature area, and now they know. And they can work on it, and they feel more accountable to it. So those are some of the things that we've thought about over the last couple of years. NPS is how we measure SAT. Obviously, we measure attrition, we measure credits, and we try to measure credits down to a level of granularity of feature, which is hard to do because that's usually text in a field somewhere that you have to go normalize and make sense of. But we do try to do that. And create that closed loop cycle. And I'm hyper involved in it. I'm probably deeper in this area than most leaders are, but it's because I think it's the most important thing we can do. Not just because of churn, which gets a lot of attention and is super important. You can't have a super leaky bucket in a SaaS business, but also because our clients are selling our software every day, everywhere they are. Every airplane seat they're sitting in is an opportunity where they might say they had a great experience or they might say they had a crappy experience. And we want to make sure that they're in the great pile. So just to wrap it up, our core success pillars are these things that we look at every day and that we work to measure within the client base. Do we have the right product set? Are we operating to contractual performance? In the small and mid-market business, we don't have a term length longer than 90 days usually. And so it is a constant effort to make sure those clients are staying engaged. And so the contractual performance for them is, are they operating to the level that they committed to us in a fast enough period that they feel like they're getting the value out of it, and are they happy engaging through that? Overall engagement, are people renewing? We look at social media, we look at all different things to create engagement scores for our clients. Are they happy? What are their NPS ratings looking like? Where are the NPS ratings falling? We've moved to a monthly NPS. We have enough quantity now that we can survey 1/12 monthly and have constant feedback for our teams. And we've created an infographic that the whole company sees that shows where NPS is trending, top 3 reasons that people are saying nice things, top 3 reasons that people are saying bad things. Whole company gets it every month. We just started that a couple months ago, and it's created some really cool visibility. And then feature adoption. Are people using the stuff that they bought? So even if it's packaged in with something else, we want to know if they're feeling the value. Because we know that if they aren't, they're going to come back and ask us to pull some parts of their contract apart. We don't want to have that happen. We want them to see the value that they put behind it. So these are the things we think about all the time. Not all of our clients are alike. They all have different characteristics and different things that they value. In the enterprise space, we try to understand that in a lot of detail. In the small and mid-market space, to operate at scale, you have to do a lot with the data and try to infer a lot from what you're hearing from a few. But we're seeing really good retention in that area as well. Our retention rates are in the mid-90s across all of our portfolio of clients and products.
So with that, thank you very much, Elena. It's been